Amy, do you have it for me or no? Not yet. Don't play it yet. What'd you say? You have it? Okay. All right. In a minute. Um, so looking out here at the crowd, most of us remember the last decade of the 20th century. Remember that? Some of you were young during that time, specifically 1990 to 1995, where we went to bed one night and woke up the next morning and it seemed like the whole world had changed. New words were being introduced into our vocabulary, and even new sounds. How many recognize this sound? Can you play it, Amy? How many remember a dial-up modem? Okay, that's good. Thanks for that. I appreciate that. New words were being added to our vocabulary, or maybe not new words, but words were being reappropriated, like the word cursor, right? For me, that was somebody who used a four-letter word, right? That was a cursor. Or a mouse. We all knew what a mouse was, and now it took on a new meaning. I had no idea what interface meant. I thought it was like a basketball term when you dunked on somebody. In your face. I thought that's what interface was, you know. But it was a pretty exciting time. But during that time, I don't know if you can remember, you know, back then, it just seemed to be things were changing so fast. You could get a little bit overwhelmed. Anybody get overwhelmed with computers and email? And it just seemed like, you know, some people just took to it like a duck to water, and others it was just so hard to kind of figure it out, and it seemed to be changing all the time, like things are even now, right? And so you seemed a bit overwhelming, I think. You know that feeling, right? To be a bit overwhelmed, the kind of proverbial deer in the headlights. Like I feel like right now with that light up there in my eyes. When the information seemed too much to even learn, and not even that it was just too much, but it was just so new. It was so out of what you had known your entire life, and it was so different. The change was sometimes too great to even make. Have you ever been there where you have too many decisions? I remember when we were in Africa, in Congo, and in Congo, they had come through 3 civil wars in 5 years, and so the infrastructure was just non-existent. The electricity was spotty at best, and so we lived in that. You get used to it, and then we had to do some training, so I went across the continent from Congo, from the west to the east to Kenya. And Kenya is more of a second world, even pushing first world type country. It might not seem like it, but it is. And they even had grocery stores there. You remember, Michelle? And we went in grocery stores, and I think it was there, right, Michelle, where it was so many choices that Michelle was just overwhelmed with the choices, right? I mean, what I'm talking about is for one item. Like we take it for granted, right? You go in and there's peanut butter, and there's, you know, how many different kinds of peanut butter? Well, in Congo, we didn't have choices like that. You wanted peanut butter, you went to the market where a woman ground peanuts and put them in a sack, a little sachet, and that was your peanut butter. And so we could be overwhelmed by choices. Or how about just absolutely just too much to learn? The change is too great to make. Or maybe you've been experienced where the grief just seems too much to bear. How many have been there before? Just doesn't seem like, I've thought of things before in my life that, you know, certain things you can handle, and certain things, you know, if you think about that yourself, but, you know, you hear things happening, and I can handle that, I can handle that. Certain things happening, I just couldn't handle that. Just feel like you would just be, just overcome with grief and just not be able to just absolutely overwhelmed. That's what I used to think about losing a child. Like, I don't know how people deal with that. And then it happened to Michelle and I. And sometimes grief is too much to bear. The mountain is just too tall. Or maybe like our story today, there are too many mouths to feed. Just even an absolutely overwhelming obstacle that they were facing. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how the disciples felt when they were with Jesus. And so a little bit of context. The disciples had just come back from being sent out 2 by 2, and they had been out kind of preaching the good news, and they experienced even some miracles and so forth, and they come back, and of course they're probably a little tired, a little worn out, and Jesus says, what we're going to do, we're going to go across to the other side of the Sea of Galilee for some rest. So that's kind of the context of setting this up. Let me just read it a little bit to you. And we'll comment as we go through. Since sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd. So one of the things that you'll see here is at the end of this, in verse 4, it says, Jewish Passover festival was near. John gives us a little bit of detail there to let us know kind of what time of the year it was. It was springtime. Springtime brings a lot of, just like for us, a lot of hope, right? Everything's blooming, everything's new. And it also gave to them this idea of remembering the people being free from bondage in Egypt. And it was always their desire too, right? So every time they celebrated Passover, it was this reminder of what God did in the past. And the same way that as God sent Moses to them, right, that he would send somebody to them to deliver them out of the kind of the bondage that they were in. So there's a lot of hope. And so John gives us a little bit of detail. It said a great crowd of people followed. Now they were all coming to Jerusalem for Passover, and they heard where Jesus was, so they kind of went around the shore and gathered where Jesus was. It said the great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountainside, sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. And so they're recalling all this stuff. And in here, there's a bunch of detail that, it just helps to understand kind of what's going on. At some point, Jesus recognized, it doesn't really say how, but he recognized that the crowd was hungry. That's the way the story is being told. And said this, when Jesus looked up, he saw a great crowd coming toward him. He said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? Now, it mentions that there were 5,000 men. Now, most scholars believe that they numbered men. They wouldn't number women and children. So they figure this crowd might have been up to 15,000 people, could have been. Maybe as much as 20,000 people. And so Jesus asked, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? And he said this, he asked this only to test them, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. And then it says, Philip answered him. He said, it would take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for a tiny bite for all these people. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. How far will that go with all these people? Philip, seeing things were the way they were, these hungry faces, right? All these grumbling stomachs. He says, why don't we, knowing that they don't have enough money in their wallets, right? They don't have a budget for this. Our resources are too small for this. Why don't we use this loaves of fish? They say, that's not going to work, right? He gives this idea, right? But what I want you to notice is in those 3 verses, it says this 3 times. I'll read it again. Jesus' question was this, where can we buy enough bread to feed all these people? Philip's response, it will take more than a half year's wages to buy bread, enough bread for a tiny bite for all these people. Andrew's idea, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will it go with, again, all these people? And Jesus saw all these people. Philip saw that there was no help for all these people. Andrew had an idea, but he said, my idea is really not that great. It's too small for all these people. I just want to just pause here just for a minute. I want us to, as we read stories like this, I want you to insert yourself, as it were, into the situation. Not that there's 15,000 mouths to feed, but have you experienced something where, what is your all these people? Have you been there? Maybe if you're in school, it's all this homework. Like all this work, and they just keep piling it on and piling it on and piling it on. Or maybe it's just work. All this work I have to do. Doesn't seem there's enough time in the day to do all the work I have to do. Maybe it's as pedestrian as all this laundry. Where's Lydia? Maybe it's all these diapers, right? I do with all these diapers. Maybe it's different for you. Maybe it's all this depression. What will I do with all this depression? Or all this dialysis? Or we've all been here before, all these bills, they just seem to keep coming in. Whatever it is for you, the problem's the same. What's the problem? The problem is there's a great need, and you look at what? The resources that you have for that given too much. And what do you see? You see it's not enough. I simply just don't have enough. The demand outweighs the supply, and you feel hopeless like Andrew. Let's just be honest here for a minute, okay? I read a story like this, and I don't know about you, but I think of these disciples. Now, they've been around Jesus. Jesus sent them out. They've experienced miracles, and yet they're with Jesus. Jesus is standing right there, and they see all these people, and how are they feeling? They're feeling like we feel. They're feeling overwhelmed. But you know, I want to say to them, come on. You saw the water to wine, right? You saw the remote healing of the government official, right? One thing I love about this one, this is the only miracle that's found in all four of the Gospels. This is the only one, the feeding of the 5,000. And I love this because this really hits us at home because it's a need for food that we all have all the time. Isn't that true? And so I want to say to the disciples, what is wrong with you guys? But the truth is, I'm just like him. Can you relate? Like, could you relate in your life? Let me ask you a question. Have you sit down ever and just kind of reviewed your life, as it were, up to this point, and look back at things and go, wow, it's amazing that I got through that and how I got through it, how it happened. Like, I could never envision it happening that way. And so, and you see it, and you go, wow, God really, really did something in my life then. No matter what it was, whether it was an emotional time, it was a physical need, whatever it was. And you saw the hand of God. And yet, when you face your current, all these people, we're just like the disciples, aren't we? We're just like the disciples. He's right there with them. They've experienced all that, and they go, well, this one, yeah, maybe those other, but not this one. Right? This one, this need is too great. And so I think all of us have been guilty of that. At least I have. I shouldn't speak for you, but my instincts tell me is that you've experienced the exact same thing. And you look back and you go, well, and then you kind of like, yeah, you give God credit, but then you kind of, you reserve a little credit for yourself a little bit, your wit, your talent, whatever it is, right? You'd think they'd say, hey, this is the need. Somebody say, I'm going to feed all these people. Hey, no worries. What do you mean no worries? Yeah, we got a secret weapon. What is it? We got Jesus. That's what I would expect them to say. I would expect to read that in there. Now, here's what they did, right? They counted the people, didn't they? They counted the people. They counted the fish, and they counted the bread. The only thing they didn't count was what? Jesus. They didn't count him. Matter of fact, they may have even counted him out. Even so, even with that, now this is, see, in these stories, this is where it really helps me because I find myself, I put myself in the story in my own life and say, okay, I get it. I'm there. Lack of faith. And then I start thinking like, without faith it's impossible to please God and all these sorts of things, right? But then, even after all that with the disciples, what does Jesus do? He goes to work. Like he goes to work. Jesus said this. Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, so they sat. About 5,000 men were there. That's why I get this idea that they counted the men. They wouldn't count the women and children, so it was a huge, huge number. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed those to those who were seated. It's interesting that seated there, we miss some of this stuff because seated to us just means like you're seated right now. But so this, I didn't research this myself. I was reading another pastor talking about this. He's talking about the Greek there. It's a different idea for seated. It's like reclining. So if you ever saw like in the Middle East how a family would sit around, they wouldn't sit around a table. They'd sit around like a I can't even describe it, maybe a low table with the food, and they'd sit on the ground, and they'd be reclining, kind of leaning on their arm like this around this. You ever do that on a picnic? In a picnic, that's how you sit, right? You kind of lean in and it's that idea that they were seated. They were kind of reclining. And Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed those who were reclining as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. That said, when they had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of 5 barley loaves left over with those who had eaten. Now, I don't know how you, I picture this crowd. They're kind of a little sleepy. Think of Thanksgiving, right? They're just a little tired after a Thanksgiving meal, kind of reclining, kind of patting their bellies. A few people get a twig, picking their teeth, right? Cleaning the fish out of their teeth, you know. That's kind of, I see this crowd, right? And so this impossible task of all these people became just like what we have, a story to tell. How many of you have a story to tell about all these people in your life? Something happening and God doing something in your life that you didn't anticipate, you couldn't think of, and he intervened in this situation. And it's not till after that you look back and you go, oh man, he came through. I didn't even recognize it even at the time. Anybody? Didn't even recognize at the time that it was happening. But we look back and we say, wow, like he really is a God who cares. He really is. Now, oftentimes it's not the exact answer that we looked for. How many of you have ever prayed for something so fervently, so wanted that thing, that person, and then later on you look back and you go, I'm so thankful God didn't give me what I thought I wanted or I needed. Anybody? Yeah. And so we learn our lessons that way. And so this impossible task became this story to tell. The problems we face become opportunities for us to see things differently. But we rarely see that at the moment, do we? It's so hard. At least it is for me. It's so hard. All we see is the problem, and the problem we deem is not good, and it shouldn't be there, and we're upset by it, rather than look at these issues in our life and see them as opportunities. It's so hard. Don't you agree? Tim, it's so hard to see your backyard falling away as an opportunity. That's, like, I get it. No, I don't know if you know Tim's situation, right? Waters came that one summer, all the rain. Backyard just went over the hill. Like, I'd actually feel bad. I couldn't go to Tim and go, hey, Tim, this is an opportunity for you. Yeah, great. I wish it was your opportunity, not mine. Do you follow what I'm saying? But Tim, we all have those things in our life, and it's so hard to see them as opportunities at the moment. And this right here, listen, 5,000 people, come on, this is, I don't know if you think it's a true story or not. I happen to think it is, but it doesn't matter. But the point is, the obstacle is insurmountable in their own efforts. Now, that's not to say that God doesn't want us to use our talents and giftings and abilities. I think he's given them to us for that reason. But there's something we're going to look at here in a minute that I want you to see. So how is it that you see your troubles? How do you see them? Because if you see them, if you see the backyard sliding away, if you see sickness, if you see just that, if you see it just as hassles and hurts and things like that in your life, what's going to happen is you're going to grow bitter, you're going to grow angry. That's just the way it is. That's what's going to happen. If that's the only way that you could see him. However, if you see those things in your life, if you see all these people as opportunities for you to trust God. Man, there were so many times in Africa, like Michelle and I told the story before. There's times I just wanted to pack it up. Michelle, let's just go. Like all this, it's not worth it. Like all the stuff we have to go through to live here in this different culture, right? Because at first you go there and it's a honeymoon stage, you love it. But then after a while, when everything is different, every cultural cue that you normally have is different, it becomes a burden, right? And you just forget, and you just slip back into your cultural habits, and now you're making faux pas all the time in the culture because you just go back to that. And it's so hard to do that, and so it gets so fatiguing. And there's so much need there, and everywhere you go, there's need, and people are, and you want to help, but you can't help everybody, and you just feel overwhelmed. But looking back, I look back, and Michelle and I, at the times that when I was weak and Michelle was strong, remember we're called here, right? We're here for a reason. And there are other times when she wanted to leave. And so you can look back at the hand of God in your life and go, I'm so thankful and grateful for those experiences. Now, not for the experience themselves, but for what I gained and how I grew through the experience. Because sometimes the experience turned around and it was fantastic. Like it was resolved. It was, right? The people were fed. But there are other times when the answer didn't come the way we thought. But there was something that happened in us, something that changed us. And so, I don't know how you see all these peoples in your life, but I hope you see them as opportunities to trust in God. Now, there's a small word that I want us to look at because this, I think, is so important for our walk. It's a small 2-letter word in this story that if you don't pay attention to it, you just kind of blow by it and you won't really think about it too deep. It's found in verse 5. It says this: when Jesus looked up and saw the crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" Now Jesus said, he already had an idea what he was going to do, but he says to Philip, "Where are we? Where are we?" And I think from the very start, from the very first pages of the Bible, I think God wants cooperation with us. God wants us to participate in, not partake, but to participate in even the very act of creation itself. And what I mean by that is this: yeah, God created everything that we know, but he didn't create things like culture and business and automobiles. We did that. We participate in creating. And from the very beginning with Adam, he said this, like God could have named all the animals, couldn't he have? Right? But he didn't. He said, Adam, I want you to do that. I want you to do that. So from the very beginning, I think God was saying, what will we do? How will we do this? And I think we have a part to play in this. And I believe that part to play is a gift. It's a gift. And it's been there from the very beginning of creation. Think about the story for a minute. So there's these people. So we sang this song. We're going to sing it again, right? Talked about manna, right, for the children of Israel. There were all these people. It was all these people back then, and they were hungry. So what did God do? God provided manna from heaven. He could have done that again, right? Like Jesus could have done that. Jesus could have said, hey, walk down to the sea, and I'm going to call the fish. They're just going to jump out to you. He could have done that, right? But he didn't do that, did he? He used participation with us. I think that's what That's what I get out of this story. What I get so often, at least for me, so often I want God just to do the thing himself, like to do the miracles, just do it and get it done. But God wants me to participate in that. God was asking me, what's in your basket? What's in your basket? He chose this small basket, single basket of a small boy. Like, what's in your basket? Maybe it's just simply a meager prayer. That's all you got. I was talking with somebody recently. They were talking about, how many remember, what's John and Pam? Bursick. Yeah. Pam would pray, and she would pray all these ways. Oh, you listen to her pray. She prays so eloquent. I can't pray like that. Well, it's not that Pam has, good prayers or bad prayers, just the way she prays, right? But maybe you think, I don't have even those fancy words to offer. I can't be as eloquent. Maybe you just have your basket's full of just a meager, simple prayer. 5 words, 10 words. That's all you have. That's all you have. That's all you have in your basket. Maybe it's just an unimpressive talent. God wants you to use it. Maybe it's just a simple apology, and God wants you to offer it. Maybe you just have enough strength just to take one step. That's all you can do. Like, it's a long road. You know it's a long road. Long road to recovery. He said, just take one step. This is one. That's all you got to do. Just start the journey. Take one step. I want to leave us with a few questions to ponder. And the first is this. What in your life have you decided is too big for God to handle? What is your all these people? Just think about it. Right this moment, but like throughout the day, throughout the week, think about it in your life. Do you have that now? And maybe you don't. That's great. I hope you don't. But the day will come where you'll have all these people again. And ask yourself, have I decided that this time in my life, is just too big for God? It's just too big. Because the disciples did that. And the second thing is just ask yourself, what have I decided in my own life that's too little for God to work with? I hear it all the time. I don't have anything to offer. Like I can't teach, or I can't preach, or I can't, whatever it is. I have too little to offer. What's in your basket? I think the big idea for us today is this, is that oftentimes we're to use our talents and our abilities. That's why he's given them to us, right? But I think there are some times when God desires to use the little we have to show how big he is in our life. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you'll look back and you'll see that in your life, where you didn't have what it took, but somehow, some way, and you didn't recognize the time, but God showed up. God did something for you that you couldn't even see at the time. And you look back and you see now what he did. Let me tell you a story. Story of Biddy Chambers. She met her husband in 1908. They were married in 1910. And Biddy and her husband, that was her pet name that he gave her, they decided they wanted to start a Bible school together. And her husband was an amazing teacher. And all she could do is she was a stenographer, but she was really, really good at it. And so all his lectures, anywhere he taught, she kept meticulous records of everything he ever taught. And what they would do is they would develop because they wanted a Bible school, they would develop into a correspondence course for people to study. And then World War I broke out, and her husband felt a call to go to serve as a chaplain in the military. So he felt called to Egypt. And so he took Biddy and their 2-year-old daughter, and they moved to the Middle East. It was there that her husband died. And all her dreams seemed to die right with him. The dreams of starting a Bible school and so forth, right? You'd think that would be the case. But it wasn't for Biddy. Biddy decided to give God what was in her basket. And so Biddy began to use her talent in stenography and put all her husband's teachings in these pamphlets. And she would send these pamphlets out to everybody that she knew, anybody that she knew about, friends and everything. And then they took all those pamphlets and they bound them together into a book. And maybe you've heard of the book. My utmost for his highest. Anybody read these? Yeah? You ever read one? I want you to read one. Who else? You want one? Who else? All right. I think the moral here is that oftentimes we downplay even the little bit that we have. We downplay it. But all God is saying is, listen, I desire you to participate in this with me. And it doesn't have to be some great shakes. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be the best at anything, because I'm right there with you. And so no one could predict, even Biddy couldn't predict the way in which these teachings of her husband, Oswald Chambers, would change so many people's lives. Some of the earliest readers were people like Billy Graham, Bill Bright, Henrietta Mears, Bill Wilson and Bob Smith, founders of AA, early readers of this. Many presidents have found inspiration from it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this: next time you feel overwhelmed, do your best to remember who's standing next to you, who's with you in that trouble, in that difficulty, when you feel absolutely overwhelmed. What's too much for you is never too much for him. I want the band, why don't you guys come up here? Told you I'd finish early.